Pain is a part of life. Disappointments happen. Stress happens. Conflict happens. Loss happens. That's just the first arrow. But according to an ancient Buddhist teaching, there's a second arrow that often causes even more suffering. And that second arrow is the one that we fire into ourselves. It's the replaying, the overthinking, the resentment, the catastrophizing, the why does this always happen to me story loop. In other words, the event hurts, but then the mind keeps reopening the wound. So today we're talking about how we unintentionally create extra suffering in our lives, and more importantly, how to stop doing it. Welcome to the Personal Mastery and Growth Podcast, where we explore the keys to unlocking your full potential and living your best life. I'm your host, Jose Johnson. Whether you're looking to make a breakthrough, overcome a challenge, or simply live with greater clarity, joy, and purpose, you'll find the tools and inspirations you need right here. So let's start your journey towards personal mastery and growth right now. Welcome back to the Personal Mastery and Growth Podcast, your go-to resource for practical tips, insightful research, and inspiring stories to help you unlock your full potential. I'm your host, Jose Johnson, and I'm an expert in the fields of mindfulness, mindset, and peak performance, and I am so excited to have you here with me today. And in today's episode, we're exploring one of the most practical and powerful concepts that I've ever encountered in mindfulness philosophy, the concept of the second arrow. Now, this teaching comes from Buddhism, but what's fascinating is how strongly it aligns with modern neuroscience, psychology, emotional intelligence, and even Stoic philosophy. Because when you really understand this concept, you begin to realize something very important. A large percentage of human suffering is not caused by the event itself. It's caused by the mental and emotional spirals that we create afterwards. And honestly, once you start seeing that second arrow in everyday life, you'll see it everywhere. All right, so let's dive in. All right, so the original teaching is like this. When life hits us with something painful, that's the first arrow. And the first arrow is often unavoidable. Examples of first arrows include things like rejection, criticism, illness, disappointment, uncertainty, failure, embarrassment, grief, stress, financial hardship, or conflict. Yeah, life happens. And pain, well, it's just part of being human. But then comes the second arrow. And the second arrow is our reaction to the pain. It's the story we build around it. It's the emotional spiral. It's the replaying of conversations at 2 a.m. It's the catastrophizing. It's the resentment. It's the self-criticism. It's the, why does this always happen to me? Look, the first arrow, it hurts. But the second arrow, it keeps us suffering. And the interesting thing is that many people spend more time suffering from the second arrow than from the original event itself. Right? Think about how often this happens. Maybe someone criticizes you at work. That moment lasts for 30 seconds. But then your mind replays it for 3 days. Or maybe a relationship ends. Sure, the breakup itself is painful enough. But then the mind starts adding, I'll always be alone. Nobody ever chooses me. I'm not enough. I wasted years of my life. Now the original pain has expanded into identity-level suffering. And sometimes the event lasted for 10 minutes, but the mind turns it into 10 months. Or in some cases, 10 years. And I think one of the reasons this concept is so powerful is because it reminds us that while we cannot always control the first arrow, we have influence over the second one. Now, at this point, some people may be wondering, if the second arrow is so destructive, why does the brain do this? And the answer, well, it's actually pretty fascinating. See, your brain is not designed primarily to make you happy. It's designed to help you to survive. The human nervous system evolved in dangerous environments where paying close attention to threats increased the odds of survival. Now, This means that your brain developed what psychologists call a negativity bias. Negative experiences tend to capture more attention than positive ones. And this is why criticism sticks longer than compliments, why stressful experiences replay more vividly, and embarrassing moments feel impossible to forget. Your brain thinks, if this hurt us before, we need to remember it so it doesn't happen again. That's survival wiring. But in modern life, the same mechanism can create emotional loops that become deeply unhealthy. The amygdala, which plays a major role in emotional processing and threat detection, can become highly activated during stressful experiences. And once it's activated, the brain begins scanning for additional danger. And that's where the second arrow starts multiplying. Now, suddenly, one criticism becomes, everybody's judging me. One setback becomes, I'm a failure. One awkward conversation becomes, people don't like me. The mind begins generalizing. And what's even more interesting is that the brain then starts looking for evidence to confirm the emotional story. This is where confirmation bias comes in. If your mind creates the story, nothing ever works out for me, your brain will unconsciously filter for supporting evidence. Not because it's trying to hurt you, but because the brain prefers consistency, even unhealthy consistency. And that's why emotional spirals can become self-reinforcing. The brain keeps replaying the wound in an attempt to protect us from future pain, while unintentionally trapping us inside the pain itself. Now, this is where the conversation can get kind of deep, because one of the biggest causes of the second arrow is attachment. And when I say attachment, I don't just mean relationships. I mean attachment to outcomes, to expectations, identity, control, fairness, certainty, or how we think life should go. A huge amount of suffering comes from arguing with reality. For example, this shouldn't be happening. People shouldn't act this way. My life should be further along by now. Things should be easier. I shouldn't feel like this. But reality doesn't negotiate with our preferences. And the more tightly we cling to how things must unfold, the more painful disruptions become. Now, this is something that both Stoics and Buddhists understood deeply. Suffering often increases in direct proportion to attachment. Now, let me be clear. Acceptance does not mean resignation. It doesn't mean passivity, and it doesn't mean that you stop caring. Acceptance simply means seeing reality clearly instead of emotionally fighting what already exists. And honestly, this is one of the most freeing mindset shifts that we can develop, because many people are not suffering solely from reality itself. They're suffering from their resistance to reality. And that resistance, well, that becomes the second arrow. All right, so let's make this extremely practical, because we all fire second arrows into ourselves in everyday life, sometimes without even realizing it. So, for example, you have one stressful interaction, and then you spend the entire day replaying it mentally. Or you make one mistake, and now you're attacking yourself internally for hours. Or maybe you're already anxious, and then you spend an hour doom scrolling through negative news and social media. That's adding arrows. Sometimes we unknowingly become emotional archaeologists. We keep digging up old pain to examine it again, replaying it, reanalyzing it, rehearsing it. And every time we emotionally relive the experience, the nervous system responds as if the threat is happening again in real time. Now, that's one reason rumination is so emotionally exhausting. Your body cannot distinguish between vividly imagined stress and immediate stress, which means that the mind keeps the body trapped in survival mode. And this is why unresolved resentment can become so corrosive. The other person may have moved on months ago, but internally, you're still reliving the emotional event over and over again. You keep reopening the wound. And honestly, social media has amplified second arrow living dramatically. We now live in a world where people repeatedly expose themselves to outrage, comparison, fear, conflict, and emotional stimulation all day long. The nervous system never fully settles. The mind never fully disengages. People become psychologically addicted to emotional activation. And eventually, emotional overwhelm starts feeling normal. And that's dangerous. Because when suffering becomes familiar, people sometimes stop questioning whether they're contributing to it themselves. Hey there, feeling stuck? Spinning your wheels? Are you ready for a breakthrough? Well, then you need to hear this because I've got something that will supercharge your growth this year, and it's called The Mindset Makeover. Now, it's my new book and course that are designed to help you upgrade the mental software that drives your success. And inside, you're going to discover the mindsets that shape every decision, every habit, and every result. And you'll learn the science-backed tools to rewire your thinking for clarity, confidence, and unstoppable momentum. So whether you're aiming higher, trying to break free from old patterns, or finally stepping into that version of yourself that you know that you're capable of becoming, well, this is your launch pad. So don't wait. Head over to josejohnson.com/mindset to grab the book, join the course, or get both together. Again, that's josejohnson.com/mindset. And remember, it is what it is, but it becomes what you make it. And with the Mindset Makeover, you can make it something extraordinary. All right, so here's the empowering part. You may not always control the first arrow, but you can absolutely reduce the second one. And that begins with awareness. The first step is learning to recognize when you're mentally amplifying pain instead of processing it. Ask yourself, am I dealing with the actual event or my story about the event? Am I solving the problem or rehearsing suffering? Is this reflection or rumination? Now, that distinction really matters because reflection creates learning, whereas rumination creates emotional looping. One of the most powerful tools for interrupting the second arrow is mindfulness. Mindfulness creates space between stimulus and reaction. So instead of instantly becoming consumed by emotional spirals, you begin to observe it. You notice, oh, my mind is catastrophizing right now, or I'm replaying this conversation again. That awareness alone reduces emotional fusion. Now, when people hear the word mindfulness, many immediately picture someone sitting silently on a mountaintop meditating for 3 hours. And honestly, I think that misconception prevents a lot of people from exploring mindfulness in practical ways. Because mindfulness is not about becoming emotionless. It's not about emptying your mind, and it doesn't require massive amounts of time to practice effectively. At its core, mindfulness simply means becoming aware of what's happening internally and externally in the present moment without immediately reacting unconsciously. That's it. Sometimes mindfulness is just taking one intentional breath before responding, noticing that your mind is spiraling, recognizing tension in your body, catching a negative thought or pattern, or pausing long enough to ask, am I firing the second arrow right now? Those small moments of awareness can completely interrupt emotional momentum. And the beautiful thing is that mindfulness can often be practiced in seconds, not hours. The mindful breath, the mindful pause, a mindful observation. Those tiny moments create psychological space. And in that space, we regain choice. And that's one of the reasons I wrote my first book, Mindfulness Secrets, 90 Ways in 90 Days. I wanted to help people understand that mindfulness doesn't have to feel intimidating, mystical, or disconnected from real life. It can be practical, simple, accessible, and incredibly powerful for managing stress, emotional overwhelm, and mental reactivity in everyday situations. Because often the difference between suffering and resilience is found in a single moment of awareness before reaction. Now, another incredibly effective tool is emotional labeling. Research has shown that naming emotions can reduce amygdala activation. Now, this is where the phrase "name it to tame it" becomes incredibly powerful. Instead of "everything is terrible," you become more precise. I'm feeling disappointed. I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling embarrassed. I'm feeling rejected. Precision reduces the emotional chaos. Breathwork can also help interrupt the second arrow because emotional spirals are physiological as well as psychological. Now, this is where practices like my 90-second reset become useful, because sometimes the goal is not to think your way out of suffering. Sometimes the nervous system just needs to regulate first. And if you want to learn more about how to use the 90-second reset, there's a link in the show notes for a short instructional video to help you get started. And perhaps most importantly, practice acceptance. Not approval, not surrender, acceptance. The moment we stop emotionally fighting reality, we free up energy to actually respond to it wisely. Now, one of the most important things to understand is that avoiding the second arrow does not mean becoming emotionally numb. Pain still matters. Grief still matters. Loss still matters. Hardship, well, it still matters. Because we're human beings, not robots. The goal is not to eliminate emotion. The goal is to stop unconsciously multiplying suffering. Because pain can teach you without becoming your identity. A difficult season can shape you without defining you. A mistake can instruct you without becoming your self-worth or lack thereof. And a painful experience can be acknowledged without becoming a permanent emotional resonance. That's emotional maturity. That's mindfulness. And honestly, that's freedom. Look, life will always contain first arrows. There will always be setbacks, disappointments, uncertainty, conflict, and pain. That's part of being human. But we do not always have to keep firing the second arrow into ourselves. We don't have to endlessly replay pain. We don't have to attach our identity to every difficult experience. And we don't have to turn temporary hardship into permanent suffering. Awareness changes that. Mindfulness changes that. Ownership changes that. So this week, I want you to begin noticing, where in your life are you experiencing the first arrow? And where might you be creating the second one? And that single question could completely change your emotional life. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure to share it with someone who may need to hear it. And as always, please subscribe, follow, and leave a review, because it really helps us continue reaching more people with these conversations. So until next time, remember, it is what it is, but it becomes what you make it. So make it great. Thanks for tuning in. Before we wrap up, I just want to remind you that the information shared in this podcast is for educational and informational purposes only. It is not intended as a substitute for professional advice or treatment. While the content of this podcast is based on research and personal experience, everyone's situation is unique, and the advice given may not be applicable to all. Always consult a qualified professional before making significant changes in your life. The Personal Mastery and Growth podcast is recorded at the So Good Media Studios, located in the Candy Factory, a co-working space in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.